I shall now take you to a new interesting segment on the Capitol Forum called Women's Eye View. This is presented here by a graceful lady, Abla Doku. Her guests are very unusual, but quite powerful. Let's meet one of them here on this set of the Capitol Forum.
Welcome to Women's Eye View, an educational series covering thoughts, perspective, and outlook on business, entertainment, fashion, finance, leadership, sex, health, and wellness through the eyes of women. I'm your hostess, Abla Doku. We have with us today Michele Arnett. Michele, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You were born and raised in Florida, but currently live in the Washington, D.C. metro area. You just recently started a new nonprofit and you sit on the board. What got you to this place? What made you decide to start this nonprofit?
Great. So, well, it's actually a group of women that started it. We started it in November of 2016, very much as a result of a man who didn't speak too kindly about women. And that's what started it, is because it was a very triggering time for survivors. So we started this private Facebook group as a resource for us to share tips, tricks, stories, basically to have people that understand what we're going through be able to listen to us. And it ballooned over to 350 people quite rapidly within the next couple of months.
Okay.
And then we started a public Facebook page, and that's garnered over 600 supporters, not even within a year. So then we applied for our 501c3 in April. We're granted it, thankfully.
That's one.
And everything just started to take off to where we're actually being able to provide services as well.
So you were, when you were 23, you were violently sexually assaulted.
Yes.
In the workplace?
No, not in the workplace.
Not in the workplace. Okay. So tell us about that. What, did you have the resources that you needed after that happened? And how did you manage to begin to heal? And what was the process like?
Yeah. Well, it took 3 years for the justice system to imprison the man who raped me, and he was actually just recently sentenced. However, I will say there's a ton of resources out there for women and men who have been raped and assaulted, but there's still gaps. And what those gaps were what SAS focuses on. I had, family that was there for me. I went and lived with my aunt and uncle for a month because I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore.
Okay.
I had a workplace that was supportive. But there were still gaps. And I had to move back down to Florida to take care of my parents. Okay. And while I was there, I noticed an even bigger discrepancy outside of the DMV for resources available. I had a therapist up here, but down there weren't anybody that were specifically focusing on young women with PTSD who were sexually assaulted. And while I'm sure there were some there, I would then have to pay for them. And when you are impoverished, living in rural Florida, you can't pay for a therapist.
You can't afford for that.
You can't afford it. Whereas there in the DC area, there are organizations that will help you with the medical expenses.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of the gaps. One of the gaps would be that there are not enough therapists in terms of other regions.
Yeah.
What other gaps did you find or do you see, and what are those gaps that you are trying to fill as SAS?
Yeah, so at SAS we focus on 3 things. We focus on education, we focus on support, and we also focus on advocacy. For education, what we've noticed is there's a lack of information for workplaces, there's a lack of information for partners, for families and friends on how to appropriately and healthily support a survivor of domestic assault or domestic violence and sexual assault. We also have found that a lot of survivors don't necessarily understand the psychology behind PTSD. They're told that they have PTSD, but they're not told what that might mean.
Okay.
And the same thing for the workplaces, partners, families. They don't quite understand how that can have a tangible impact, not just on the survivor, but on their relationship with the survivor and on
And everyone else
themselves as
behind.
well.
Okay. So can you shed a bit more light on that? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, for instance,
Okay.
It's in the DMV before I had moved out to Florida. I was working for a great company. They understood in a way that something serious had just happened. I had almost lost my life, and the boss's boss actually called me up and she said, "Don't worry, you're safe. Tell us what you need, and we'll do the best that we can to do that." So it's important for a company to kind of understand why that's important.
Okay.
But when I moved down to Florida, that wasn't there. It was very brash. It was very disconcerting. I still had a woman as my boss, but
Okay.
she didn't quite understand the gravity of what I was going through and how PTSD would impact me in the workplace.
So does that call for, sounds like, do we need more education? Do we need policy? What is it that we can do as a society to fill these gaps and also understand what someone might be going through? And what can we do for someone who is suffering or just went through such a traumatic experience?
Listen. Point blank. That's the best advice that I could give to somebody. Listen and offer support. For a lot of survivors, a lot of what they're needing to do is gain back control because that's violently ripped from us during an assault. So we're looking for ways to still have control over facets of our lives, so we still want to carry on. But there comes a breaking point where we still need to show vulnerability, and that's a very scary thing for a survivor of sexual assault, and that makes it very difficult. So if a survivor of sexual assault is disclosing that and expressing whatever it may be, whether it's to a partner or to a workplace, whomever, wherever, that takes an extreme leap of trust. And in a lot of ways, the person who's listening to a survivor should feel honored that that survivor trusts them that much.
Yes. So do you feel that we need more public policy in terms of the workplace? Because some of the what we are hearing in terms of people being harassed, being abused, in the case of Harvey Weinstein, for example, this is happening in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
And we know that a lot of people spend how many hours in the workplace? 8 hours at the very least each day. So if such experiences are happening, do we need to have policies at the workplace? What do you think has to happen in such environment to reduce the occurrences of abuse of women or even nowadays men, really?
Yeah, certainly. It really comes down to policies in the workplace, and it comes to, let me change that up. It's not just policies, it's enforceable policies. And if a transgression happens, that policy is actually enforced. And then it also comes down to education, because a lot of people just don't necessarily understand that a touch on the forearm could technically be sexual harassment, even if it isn't intended to be. So it really does come down to education, and it comes to enforceable policies.
So what is it that managers can do, for example, and we're still talking about the workplace. So what advice do you have for a manager or a supervisor who has a group of people that they're leading and someone comes to them saying, such a thing has happened to me? What can that supervisor do?
Yeah, so it's great to point out here that for every dollar invested into an employee's health, whether that's physical health or mental health, the business owner, manager, they're going to get 1.5 to 2 times return on investment. So this is statistically proven.
Okay.
And that doesn't just apply to sexual assault survivors, that applies to everybody. So it's important to note that sexual assault survivors, they're coming from a place of pain, physical and emotional. So, it could be something as simple as letting somebody go, taking a longer lunch break to go see a therapist, because they have to still incorporate work. They still have to incorporate that into their daily lives, and oftentimes that could, encroach upon work time. It could be something as simple as recognizing the signs of when a sexual assault survivor might be emotionally shutting down. And that could happen at work if they become silent or if they become frustrated, just kind of taking a step back and just knowing basic coping mechanisms, and also being able to provide a safe space for the survivor.
So those are things that folks can look for even in the home environment, in any environment really, to kind of get to know what it is that people who are dealing with such a trauma might be experiencing and be showing, so that folks can actually step forward and, I don't know that intervening is the right word, but at least try to help them process whatever it is that they are going through. So one of the things that you're trying to do at SAC is to take out the stigma that survivors have to carry with them, or how they are perceived. So what's your strategy in making sure that people who suffer such trauma are not penalized and punished over and over again, and making and being made to feel as though it's their fault that whatever happened happened, instead of pointing the finger where it truly belongs?
Yeah. So at SAS, once we start working with a survivor, they basically gain an army of survivors, and we're all in a different point in our healing. We're all in a different point in whether we disclosed our rape to the authorities, whether we didn't. So that's the beauty of it. They've basically gained an army of men and women who understand what they're going through, and that's one phenomenal way. And the great thing about it is that in SAS, there's several public survivors, such as myself, and simply talking about it, such as you and I are doing, that's a great way to break down those barriers. There's always going to be survivors that don't want to talk about it, and that is totally understandable because it's a traumatic experience. They don't want to relive it. But then there are survivors like myself who were very vocal, and it kind of takes an understanding from both sides to know that and to really break it down.
So you have used such a horrible experience, and you've turned that around, right? And you through this experience, you are reaching out to other people. You are educating other people. In fact, you're educating all of us to let us know that this does exist, and it's actually more prevalent than we think. And the interesting thing is that I'm originally from Ghana, so I know that it's not just an American issue. It's actually a global issue where women, and nowadays young men, are continually assaulted or harassed or abused in many shapes and forms. And it's not just, sometimes you think things happen in neighborhoods that doesn't have enough resources, but that's not the case. We've seen that in the news. It's happening all over the place. So that, I think that if we can find more of you, right? Everyone is willing to speak about it, and not just speak about it, but actually do something about it. So those of us who are viewers, those of us who are listeners, what can we do to help a survivor?
Great. Listen. It's important to note that 1 in 4 women have been victims of sexual assault, and recently it's come to light that 1 in 6 men. Before, it's been kind of tenuous on how many men, but it's been an issue.
Yes.
And what's great about just listening and believing and not judging is that that's where real change is going to take place, just by simply listening.
Thank you so much, Michelle,
Yeah,
for
thank
coming
you.
on the show.
Thank
We
you.
very much appreciate it. And that's it for us today, Women's Eye View. Thank you for joining us, our audience and viewers. I am your host, Tess Abladoku, and see you next time.